You are listening to the Loida Lewis podcast, hosted by Loida Nicolas Lewis. She's a trailblazing businesswoman, leader, philanthropist, and the widow of Reginald F. Lewis, the visionary leader who was the first African American to build a billion-dollar company. With unparalleled determination, Loida Lewis has not only excelled as a successful attorney, but also shaped a billion-dollar empire. Following the untimely passing of her husband, Reginald F. Lewis, she took the helm of TLC Beatrice, carving her legacy as a successful business leader. Be inspired and learn from her as she shares her wisdom, the secrets to her success in both business, in love, and in life. Let's live, love, laugh, and learn. With your host, Miss Loida Lewis.
Hello, welcome to the Loida Lewis podcast. Let's live, love, laugh, and learn together. And today I have the great pleasure of introducing you to the first Filipina UN Women Goodwill Ambassador, Karen Davila. And here she is.
Wow, Loida, I am just ecstatic. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I've interviewed you many times on Head Start for many reasons, and now it's such an honor that the roles are reversed.
I'm so thrilled when you said, yes, I can be interviewed. So this time, I will be the Karen Davila. I'm asking the question. So the first question that everyone, or at least I am interested, is that, when I hear of UN Ambassador, wow, Angelina Jolie. So please tell us, how did it happen? You are the first Filipino woman to have this title.
I have to agree with you. I think Angelina Jolie made being a Goodwill ambassador more popular worldwide because not only was she famous, but she was quite active. So she took the role very seriously. And I think she set the tone for Goodwill ambassadors in the future, not just to use the name and the stature of being appointed as a Goodwill ambassador, but to actually use your platform for any kind of change that you can make for the better. So the Philippines has never had a Goodwill ambassador. The global UN Women Goodwill ambassador, you have a few. You have Anne Hathaway, you have Nicole Kidman, you have Emma Watson, and they're chosen, of course, for their global influence. And there are some countries with their own Goodwill ambassadors. So it's actually surprising that the Philippines never had one, considering that the Philippines actually ranks quite high when it comes to the Gender Equity Index from the World Economic Forum. We've also crafted laws in the Philippines to protect women. The Magna Carta for Women, the anti-domestic violence laws, recently anti-child bride or anti-child marriage laws. In other words, we have a healthy democracy when it comes to protecting women. You know what? I started volunteering for UN Women during the pandemic, but all my life I was always an advocate. I was volunteering for World Vision, for education, and also Habitat for Humanity. When I volunteered for UN Women, they didn't have an ambassador. And the Philippine office told me that they had submitted a few names to the headquarters here in New York because the Philippines already wanted a Goodwill ambassador to also push for the Philippine agenda. And I didn't think anything of it because it took 3 years for UN Women headquarters to actually vet the candidates and choose me. The appointment came as a surprise. So I have to say, Loida, I'm 53 years old now. I've been a broadcast journalist for 34 years. It's an honor that I really take with much humility and grace, and I'm really grateful for this.
No, we are so proud that they chose you, and I didn't know it took 3 years.
It took 3 years.
Yes, quite an accomplishment. But going back to the beginning, when you came to broadcast journalism, you mentioned the GMA TV. So can you tell us, how did that happen? Is that always your dream to be in on television?
You know, Loida, all the time I've spoken to you, you've always been such an inspiration to me because you've spoken about two things: hard work and destiny. You've always said that, and you've always told me there are things we can control and things that the university will choose to surprise us with. You know, I come from a very middle class family. And I remember growing up when Ninoy Aquino died in 1983, and I share this story when I go to universities. Our family experienced financial hardship. So naghirap ang pamilya namin. I was already in high school, in a private school, and I started to see my mother really take the reins at home of making sure that we would stay in school. So she started small businesses, and she trained us early on that the key to survival is really hard work and to rely on yourself, in effect, because it was quite difficult for my parents then. Ito yung panahon na, if I could say it in Filipino, I'm sure you have Filipino guests, napuputulan kami ng kuryente, minsan yung tuition namin sa eskwelahan, delayed ang pagbayad. So I remember I was 15 or 16 years old, and coming from a very middle class setup, suddenly it was such a shock to the system. But it was also the greatest teacher. So I went to UP, and I really wanted to be a fashion designer. That was my dream because I was creative, I was artistic. And I went to UP for the sole purpose, in a way, of helping my parents because it was free.
Free education.
It wouldn't
yes.
be too much of a burden for them.
If you pass the exam.
Exactly. So I'm the eldest of three. So when I was in high school going to UP, I actually applied for a full scholarship at the Parsons School of Design in New York.
New York.
Because when I was much younger, I was exposed to Vogue magazine, and I loved Donna Karan, the designer. So New York was always such a dream. I said, I want to work in New York. I want to be a designer in New York. Pero syempre, Loida, for you to be given a full scholarship, you have to be so talented.
And also, American citizen, more or less.
More or less.
They don't give it for foreigners.
Yeah, and I wasn't that talented, obviously. So na-reject ako. I remember, iyak ako ng iyak, and I thought my life was over. Sabi ko, what's gonna become of me if I can't achieve my dream of becoming a fashion designer? So I went to UP and took up mass communications because I was also a writer in high school. And I remember magfa-fine arts ako noon. My father told me, "Naku Karen, wag ka naman mag-fine arts, baka magutom ka." Mahirap naman yun na magutom ka. Di ba? Magugutom.
Yes.
So I took up mass communications not knowing what my future would be. But it was just a professor in one of my classes who said, "You know, Karen, you speak very well, you articulate quite well. You should consider going into television news."
Nice. Who was that? Do you remember her name?
That was Professor David and Evelyn David. And that was such a game changer for my life. So that's when I started watching Lauren Legarda, The World Tonight, Inside Story, mga panahon mo tuloy.
Cheche Lim Lazaro.
Cheche Lazaro, the Probe Team, sila yung mga icons noon. So I said, wow, that's what my professor said. I could try and be that. Without knowing anything, I started becoming more exposed to television, watching it, seeing them. And suddenly, when I graduated, I started auditioning. And I auditioned.
Meaning sending your resume.
And going sa studio to really audition. Meaning you write on the spot, and you also read on the spot. So you have TV networks deciding, oh, let's get this girl.
And that was your first job at GMA.
I would have to say that was my first job. I got accepted actually when I auditioned in ANC, which was Sarimanok before, and the first salary was like $150 US. And in GMA 7, it was $100 US a month. A month. That was the salary, minus 10% tax. But I took GMA 7 then. It was a morning show because it was, it wasn't cable. I had a bigger audience. So I started reporting and doing anchoring the morning show, in which Rico Hizon was my first partner on air, and Juan Isberto. So that was 1993. Loida, I have been on television for 34 years.
Yes, bravo.
Praise God.
Yes. So how did you move to ABS-CBN?
So I stayed with GMA7 for 7 years, and I'm really grateful to GMA7 because I learned everything there. You know, it was in GMA7 that I learned to write, I learned to put a story together, I learned to research. It was the hard knocks, as you've said in the interviews with me. And Marisa Flores was my mentor in GMA7, Lucy Cruz Valdez, and I went to Probe Team for a short while, where Cheche Lazaro served as an inspiration, and Jessica Soho. These were figures in GMA wherein, you know, they were the early role models, and I think that was important. I moved to ABS in the year 2000, and I would have to say, moving forward, that it was in ABS that I really grew. I mean, because ABS was such a big network, so they allowed me to do so many things. I did Filipino radio every day, pasada sa 6:30. I've been doing Head Start now for over, maybe put it to 20, I don't know if it's 15, 16 years. And that's a daily political show wherein I learned every day to sharpen my skills, think on my feet. And with ABS, they gave me the break of doing the late night newscast and the primetime newscast. I did documentaries in ABS. I mean, I have to say, in ABS, they allowed me to do everything. So even if we've experienced such hardship now, I remain loyal to ABS because I really, really value who I've become because of ABS-CBN.
Yes, tell us about it, because, you know, during the Duterte time, they canceled in Congress, okay, the license of ABS-CBN. So how did you manage during that very, very hard period?
You know, Loida, I often say, and until today, so our franchise was not renewed, I believe, in 2021. If I remember, I could be wrong. Please correct me, either 2020 or 2021. But I always tell my colleagues sometimes that I feel I'm living with PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. It's like galing ka ng gera. So, I think I can say it now that the lowest point in our lives really in broadcast journalism is really during the time of former President Duterte. And I don't mean to say this to insult him personally, but I don't think they really understood the gravity of their actions then. You know, free media came back when the late Cory Aquino came back into power. When the late Ferdinand Marcos was ousted and Cory Aquino came back to power, over 400 or 500 media entities went back in full swing. ABS was just one of them. They started to think that it was only ABS. No. Over 400 media outlets closed during martial law. And the gains from Cory Aquino to Duterte, wherein we had such a thriving media business. You know, we were the living example in Asia of a free press. The Philippines is a young democracy, and yet you had the press, which was the fourth estate. It held power into account, right? That's the kind of media we were. Commentators on radio would call out presidents every morning without fear. And during the time of former President Duterte, when they chose not to renew the franchise of ABS-CBN, the largest media network, the domino effect, it was brutal. Number one, you had 11,000 employees that were affected. But that's just directly. There's a supply chain, an industry that depends on ABS-CBN, right? Because you're one person, but you'd have a family. Then you'd also have workers that relied on you. So it was a supply chain of the industry. Number two, when ABS-CBN got off the air, it changed the viewing habits completely. it affected also viewing habits of television. A lot of the viewers didn't go completely to GMA 7 or Channel 5. They went to digital. So it changed the viewing landscape. Number three, media entities that were left started to earn less because advertisers started to go to YouTube and Facebook because they started to discover that Filipinos were no longer watching terrestrial media. They were online. And number four, I think politically speaking, ABS-CBN united the country. I mean, maybe if you're a politician, you don't agree with it. I've had politicians tell me, Karen, that you're assuming on that part, that's presumptive. And I don't agree because ABS-CBN, because of its wide reach, let's say there was a typhoon, there was an earthquake, the whole Filipino people knew where to watch. ABS-CBN had regional networks all over the country. And then you would come together as a nation and feel for that province. Now today, kung binagyo ang Bicol o kung saan man, hindi mo alam saan panonoorin. Where will you watch it? On Facebook? On YouTube? Well, these platforms are view when you want. And that's the psychology of television. In the Philippines, television at some point was appointed viewing. It would tell you psychologically, it's your time to watch the news.
Yes, that's right.
Get to know what's happening to your country. Now, you don't want to watch? You don't have to.
That's right.
Right? So
Yes, sir.
you've completely changed the viewing habit of the Filipino. And what's scarier is election time. I don't think the politicians who were also around Duterte then and Duterte himself, how does this affect voting for the next president? Networks like ABS-CBN could discover new politicians. They could discover aspiring public servants. They could help the public know. You can consider this person. Well, Loida, that is gone. Because now, who has the edge? The politician with a lot of money and in power? The politician already with a famous name? The politician who's already either the son or daughter of a former president?
Dynasty.
Absolutely. It's dynastic even more in nature. And number four, the politician who has already a strong YouTube and Facebook following. And the politician who has a lot of money to spend for Facebook followers, YouTube followers. You can't discover a Leni Robredo at this point. How would you? How would you get to know a person like that? Mm-hmm. There is no vehicle.
Well, if we have a new president,
Yeah.
BBM, or President Marcos Jr., if you have time with him, how would you say, or what would you suggest to restore the free press, actually, how to restore something like the influence of an ABS-CBN? What would you advise him?
President Marcos Jr. is in a space right now where he's actually, in a way, trying to carve his own path, right? So we see it when it comes to his foreign policy. And I think with the media, I would actually advise him to think beyond his term. Sometimes I think presidents in the Philippines, some of them tend to be vindictive, or they want results just for the 6 years, what pleases them. But if I were to, I wouldn't say advise President Marcos, but, the Lopez Group themselves, they now pride themselves being a content company. So I'm not sure what the Lopez plans are in terms of even wanting a television franchise back. But I think I would like to say, as a television broadcast journalist and as a Filipino who loves ABS-CBN, I believe that at the end of the day, even if it's been so painful for the owners of ABS to have to face Congress and to go through what they did, I feel it's worth it to bring back ABS-CBN on air Because I'll be honest, the Filipino people need it. I'm 53, Loida. Maybe, who knows, in 7 years, I'm retired. Our president now, Carlo Katigbak, is a little older than me, but who knows?
The president of ABS-CBN.
ABS-CBN, he might be retired in a few years. But at the end of the day, it's not about us. The country needs ABS-CBN. You know, we're a country where the internet is wanting, right? Our interconnectivity is problematic. Not everybody in the Philippines can afford Wi-Fi, extra data. And I think television still gives them that service. In the United States, yes, you have a lot of people on Wi-Fi, but you have ABC, NBC, CBS. These are mainstream terrestrial media networks. They are still alive. They could be fighting it, but they're there. And on another issue, if we lose mainstream TV networks, we also lose the fight, I believe, to disinformation. Because mainstream media, whatever we say, are the gatekeepers of information. And while information's democratized now, which I welcome too, I still believe we need some of the old guard. You know, that's why you read the New York Times, you read the Guardian, you read the Wall Street Journal. It's the same in the Philippines. We read the Inquirer, the Philippine Star, ABS News. Even if you can go to the page of a vlogger or a blogger, nothing wrong with that. But at the end of the day, you need hardcore journalism. You still need that.
So in other words, if President Marcos is listening, you're telling him, be the best president that you could be.
Absolutely.
Not just for 6 years, but start something that will have repercussions for the future.
Absolutely. You know, well, as you told me, destiny happens. And who knows, somebody might cut this clip for President Marcos Jr. But I think that's what I would like to say, Mr. President. Think beyond your term.
Yes.
Think intergenerationally. You know, think outside the interest of your own family or your own political sphere, or just in a smaller scale. Just think for the Filipino people years to come. 20 years, 30 years, 40 years.
Yes, yes.
Right?
And for Southeast Asia, it's not like he has no model. The model for South Korea during the time of Marcos and the model for Singapore. These were two presidents at the same time as President Marcos Sr., but because they started something in their country, look where South Korea is now and where Singapore is. And the Philippines, we are good people. We're intelligent. And if the president will harness that brilliance, that intelligence, that industry of our people, he can be a great president.
And I think it's a good opportunity for me to say this is, during the time of former President Duterte, during that particular administration, that was the time when we saw the influx of labeling, right? I mean, of course, there was also red tagging against journalists was quite severe, but also the labeling of piklawan ka, ganito ka, ganito ka. And I've always said it was polarizing to the Filipino people just to label a Filipino as a certain political bias of some sort. And I always resented that in the sense that it put Filipinos in a box and it put us in an algorithm, right? And that was wrong, because you could agree with a president for a certain issue and you could disagree with another issue. It could be that you may not have voted for this president, but you agree with his foreign policy. Or you may have voted for this president, but you don't agree with his or her behavior. So I think that we have to stop simplifying the way Filipinos think about their leaders too.
Yes, and freedom of the press is part and parcel, the core of a true democracy.
And you know, Loida, thank you for saying that, because worldwide we're already seeing a decline. Press freedom worldwide is at a decline. That was discussed at the UN Women Conference this year as well, where I spoke, where number one, you have harassment with women journalists at an all-time high, whether it's actual deaths, death threats or cyberbullying, online harassment for journalists. Women journalists aren't protected online, but it's the return of misogynistic behavior that actually affects women journalists, behavior we didn't accept before, but because of the return of leaders who are misogynistic in nature, it's seeped back into the mainstream, and that's one problem. And number two is you have pluralism in media, wherein now critical thinking and critical analysis and commentaries are suffering, because I think worldwide, if you think differently from how the majority, let's say, in your country think, then you suffer. And it wasn't particularly like that many years ago.
That's true. I think this rise of autocracy, dictators,
Yes.
in so many countries, not only the Philippines during the Duterte time, during the previous administration, previous president, I don't want to mention his name, here in the United States, in Turkey, in Israel, there is a rise of this. And you as the journalist, have a responsibility to bring that out. Now, going back on a personal matter, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Yes. Can you tell the audience how I know you've been married more than 20 years, 22 years with DJ Santa Ana?
Of course.
Yes. So can you just tell us on the light matter, how did you meet the first time?
So actually, I met DJ in GMA 7. He was the news desk manager then, and I was in the current affairs department. So I wasn't technically under him, if you're going to ask me that. But we met at work, essentially, and I was 25 years old then. And then we've been married now, actually married for roughly maybe 23 years, but we've been together a total of 30 years. So DJ and I, our marriage works. I think number one, we're yin yang. So he's a man who is the wind beneath my wings. He's quite strong in a silent way, but he's extremely kind and understanding. So during the times that, let's say, I'm feeling weak or emotional or insecure, DJ is the steady hand that's there for me. I think, given my career, I don't think I also would have made it if I didn't have a husband who loved me unconditionally. So I think that's one of the things I love about DJ. And we have 2 kids. Our eldest is David, and he's 22 right now. He's in the autism spectrum, and praise God, he's in college right now taking associate degree in fine arts. So he's high functioning. It's a revolutionary treatment for so many years. And then I have another son who's 16 years old, Lucas, who's grade 10.
Wonderful. For all our leaders, look, this is a woman who is achieving high, but there is a man, as he said, the wind beneath her sails.
Yes,
right?
that's nice.
And also, so for those men married to a woman like Karen, high achiever, you have to love unconditionally and support.
Yes.
Right? But how about his career? Does he not feel competition with you?
I think that's interesting. DJ actually he's reached the level of being a senior vice president of news operations. I think his last job was in Channel 5. So he's been in news operations from GMA 7, ABS-CBN, and Channel 5. When he turned 50, he had a career shift, and he was offered to join the Aboitiz group of companies. So he's been there now for 7 years. So he's in government projects and he liaisons. And I think it also benefits us that he's in another industry. So what we do right now is there's just much more to talk about in terms of understanding each other. I think in the past, it was also quite stressful because you know the problems in the office and you tend to take it home with you because you're in the same job, same field. And you know, when ABS-CBN lost its franchise, there was a part of me that was extremely grateful that DJ was in another company. Because, you know, having children, you also need to feel secure, right, as a parent. And I think that was one of the things I was grateful for, that he's with the Aboitis group.
That's great. Okay. So for our readers, autism is a condition where the development is not quite according to normal. So can you just tell a little bit of how did you deal with that? How did you know about it? And now he is in college, which is wonderful. So for those who have that kind of experience or children in the autism field, can you share?
Thank you for asking me that, Loida. And I think a lot of mothers need to hear this. So when David was diagnosed in the autism spectrum at 3 years old, I didn't know he was autistic, right? Because he was my firstborn. I had no experience, and I thought he was just quiet or he was a brat because he was screaming all the time. So it was a good friend of mine, Small Laude, who told me, Karen, I don't want you to feel offended, but I think something's wrong with David. You need to see a developmental psychiatrist. I said, no, I don't think so. I mean, it's just spoiled. But anyway, I did. So true enough, he had all the markers of autism. There are 9 markers. And to the mothers out there listening, I blamed completely myself. I was crying for 2 weeks and I said, this is my fault. It's because I'm working so hard. Maybe I wasn't eating right, sleeping right, or I must have taken a supplement that didn't go with him. You know, the worst. I said, Lord, why me? Name it. I went through that. And the doctor then in the Philippines told me, I said, what can we do? And the doctor said, well, just bring him to speech therapy, occupational therapy, and do you want a support group? I said, there's no cure, no treatment for him to improve. She said, none, there's none. So I got me so down, I didn't accept it. So what I did being a journalist is, you know, journalists are revolutionary in thinking because we research a lot. So I found Defeat Autism Now doctors in the US and in Great Britain. So there are a group of doctors who started this movement in treating autism, right? So if you start very young and you intervene, you improve the symptoms of the child. Because sometimes autistic behaviors are behavioral. What does that mean? It could be autoimmune, it could be something in the body. So biomedical treatment is the practice that Defeat Autism Now doctors do. Medical treatment.
Okay.
So they believe you have 2 brains in the body, and this is quite popular today. During that time, in the year 2004, it was revolutionary then. This is your brain, and the gut is your brain. Your stomach, the gut.
Really?
And kids in the autism spectrum have a leaky gut. They don't have an enzyme that can actually digest certain foods, majority of it gluten, and their gut is so unhealthy that it affects their behavior, the sharpness of their mind, and even how they absorb vitamins, supplements, and minerals. So biomedical treatment is a whole process where first, there's a lifestyle change with a child that you clean up their diet. So they don't eat junk, it's really whole eating, whole foods eating, and it's a gluten-free, casein-free diet. So it's not difficult, but it's a commitment. During my time, there were no gluten-free foods. Today, it's everywhere.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
So I did that with David. And true enough, after 1 week, when he did the gluten casein-free diet, he was like a drug addict that went into withdrawal as a child. So suddenly he was sitting still. He wasn't rocking his head. He was more calm. So I saw the change. After that, the doctor then started to take blood from him. And that's when they started to measure different things. Let's say the level of mercury, aluminum in the body, etc. And these got sent to labs in the United States. And when it came back, then that's when the treatment happened. But so what is biomedical treatment? Is it immediate? Absolutely not. So I started with my son at 3 or 4 years old. He's now 22. If you see him from a boy that wasn't talking to me, a boy that was hitting his head on the wall, a boy that was not present, if you see David today, David is present, can understand you, talks to you. Of course, he will never comprehend like one of his age. There are those in the autism spectrum that are geniuses, and David's genius is in art. But I know some in the spectrum where it's math or it's English, but that's not him. But what's amazing with David is he is social, he is loving, he is friendly, he is present with you. He knows your name. He'll say, Tita Loida, how are you? And if you ask him, where did you meet Tita Loida? We went to her apartment in New York. That kind of memory. And I think for mothers listening out there, it's a treatment, it's a lifestyle you should try to consider too. Because if there's no cure for autism, then what do you have to lose?
Yes.
What do you have to lose?
For all of those listening, please listen to Karen Davila, because she is a mother who did not take no for an answer or just accepted the child. That's like this is. She sought a solution. So for every problem, children, relationship, there is a solution. Karen, I think your time is up. Thank you very much for this very solid, very substantial discourse. And to all the audience, let's give a big hand of applause for dear Karen.
Well,
for her applause.
before we go, may I just say, Loida, just to close, I think it's amazing that you're doing a podcast because technically speaking, at this point in your life, you've been doing so many things, you've proven yourself. You don't have to do it, but you choose to do this. I think in doing this podcast, you are giving back because I personally believe that women need to see more role models. And you cannot be what you cannot see, right? So when you see, you start to imagine, I can be like that woman. I can be that person. And you know, Loida, as a journalist myself, I think you know this, I have admired you for so long, not just because of what you've achieved, but frankly, it's because of your humility and grace. Considering your stature in life, you've remained just so gracious. And I think in the end, grace is the ultimate class. And thank you so much for having me.
Well, Karen, we are all God's children. So we are all God's daughter and sons. So there is no need to be proud of within ourselves.
Amen. That's so beautiful.
Yes. Thank you. So everybody, thank you very much. You just heard the great Karen Davila. If you don't mind, Karen, there's a lot of questions coming in from askloidalewis@gmail.com. And this is the first one from Carl L. Who is your favorite personality that you ever interviewed?
Oh my gosh.
Safe. Except me.
Except you. That's fantastic. I think number one, I met Madeleine Albright. Yes. And we did an ANC conference with her. And I think what struck me with Madeleine Albright, she was retired when she already went to the Philippines. But it was the fact that she was a proud immigrant, right? She's a proud
From
immigrant.
Germany.
Yes. And she really she stuck onto her values. I think that's one. I think when she got into power, she never forgot the values that she believed. She didn't compromise her own values. So that's one that I really
Catherine
admire.
Albright, for the audience, is the first woman Secretary of State of the
Yes.
United States, appointed by President Clinton.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's one. And I think locally there are many. Right now, it would be too difficult to name because I've been interviewing, personalities every day on Head Start, right?
Yes. That's good. Karen Davila has her own channel called Karen Davila.
No, but then I interviewed you on Head Start. That's on
I
ANC.
see. Okay, ANC.
Okay.
Yes, ANC. All right. The second one from Homer M. if you were to have a movie about your life, who would you want to cast to play you?
That's so good. Because I never thought of it. Oh my gosh, I like Catherine Bernardo. Kilala mo yun? Do you know Catherine Bernardo? Well, Catherine Bernardo is a local actress and I like her. I mean, I love her vibe, you know. I love her skills and she's just talented, wonderful, and that's amazing.
All right, Catherine Bernardo, you're on call. And the last one is from CV. What is the most difficult news story you ever covered?
Wow, that is good. I think I'll be honest with you. I mean, since I've been known for interviewing on Head Start every day. I think the hardest, at least in recent years, was anything that had to do with the franchise of ABS-CBN because the politicians would be on the show. And then you would be in this situation of, you know, it would be difficult to antagonize them, challenge them when you knew the decision to renew the franchise was with them. So it was such a strange situation for all of us, and especially for me that it was the premier morning political show on ANC. I think that was one. It was, I think, the Quezon landslide in 2004 where over 2,000 people died, and seeing all the bodies during the landslide. But that kind of reporting just takes an emotional toll on you because you're there, so you're surrounded by deaths. But I think for journalists, even today, a poll was conducted. Political stories technically are the hardest because you're in a situation where your network's involved and you're involved and there's so many factors at play.
Okay, thank you. And the last question from Alice G. You know, Karen, you have more than 800,000 subscribers and several millions of views. So, is it hard to be Karen Davila?
Wow, I love that. You know what? I think this is grace. I'll be honest with you. This is God's grace. This is really God's grace. You know, I started my YouTube in 2021. I thought no one would watch me, really. Because I said, di naman ako artista, di naman ako may fan base. But yet, the YouTube channel is being watched for its storytelling. You know, so I believe that there's just my success story is all about God's goodness in my life. Yes, hard work is there. Yes, I didn't take shortcuts. But at the end of the day, I think I've reached where I am today really because of God's grace.
And with that, with the beautiful words that her life is due to God's grace, I shall end this podcast. And this is Loida Lewis Podcast. Live, love, laugh, and learn together. Thank you, Karen.
Wow, that's amazing.
Galing.
Wow, Lord,
Thank you. Ang galing-galing. Galing-galing mo. That is so meaty. Naman, my God.
The Loida Lewis Podcast, hosted by Loida Lewis, is produced by the creators of Over a Glass or Two, Jesse and JV, executive produced by Loida Nicolas Lewis. Rate and review us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for a chance to be featured on a future episode. Have a question for Miss Loida? Just email us on askloidalewis@gmail.com. Your question might make its way to a future episode. Subscribe on all major platforms to never miss a beat. Thank you for listening to the Loida Lewis Podcast. Let's live, love, laugh, and learn together